All right, thank you for joining me today. This is the Tell It Like It Is podcast. I'm your host, Alexi Bailey, and I have a very special guest today, Mr. Courtney Herlock. How are you today, Dad?
I'm doing good. How are you, son?
All right, thanks for joining me today. Um, really appreciate you taking the time. So we've had a lot of informative conversations over the years, and what I've been doing with the podcast is highlighting good conversations, something informative, and also trying to help people understand what's going on in the world and help people make connections to how we can move forward.
Okay.
A lot of things that are going on today. I think people get a lot of messages from all over the place, and it's hard to connect the dots and and come to conclusions. I think, and I think the more we have good conversations, it helps people pull people in to talk about what they actually think and things like that. So,
I do. Yeah. Okay. Let me hear what the conversation is.
Dad, when did you move to the United States?
Uh, well, I moved to the United States in 2015 on a permanent basis. I've always been coming here, but I started it.
2015. How what was that? How did that feel? What was that transition like moving to the States?
It was different. I came in, I worked in Jamaica for a long time. I had stopped working there, so I came in looking at new opportunities. So I came here specifically because I started working here. I got a job while in Jamaica here, and I came. So it was primarily focused. I was primarily focused on the job and doing things along that nature. It was. It wasn't recreational or anything. It was strictly a business.
So, other than work, you wouldn't have been interested in moving to the US?
I possibly at a later date, but maybe not. I may have been still in Jamaica had it not been for the job situation.
As a Jamaican, a lot of times when I tell people from Jamaica, their eyes light up. They're excited to talk about, the good things of Jamaica. And then at some point, the conversation goes to, but I heard it's not safe. How often do you get that?
What I think Jamaica, like anywhere else, you have some places that are bad and some not so bad, and some that are excellent. Um, in the big cities, there may be issues, and some places in the cities. But overall, Jamaica is quite diverse. Quite safe if you're on the northeastern or northern part. Going into Kingston, it's a little bit tricky depending on where you are. It's all about location, as they say in real estate. Location, location.
But
But it's a beautiful.
it's funny because I was talking to someone and pretty much it was the same thing. They were from Italy, and I was saying that when you go to New York City, you want to go to Times Square, you want to see the Statue of Liberty. Those places are safe. You don't want to go to the bad neighborhoods to see anything, right? There's certain places that tourists just don't go. But for somehow people keep hearing this, like there's something going on in Jamaica that the tourist should be worried about.
Tourism, I think it is for different persons that are looking for different things. For example, if you're into the arts or you want to see the other side of how the natives, as they would say, live, you go into Kingston. If if you want sea and sun, possibly tourists going to Jamaica would be on the northeastern side where the hotels are. So I I think the tourism sector has a lot of niches, and it all depends on what the visitor is looking for. If you want to have to climb mountains, or if you want to go to the nightclubs, or if you want to see what the local culture is like in terms of the arts and entertainment, it's a wide portfolio. It's quite diverse. So it's client specific. You select what it is that you're interested in, and you gravitate towards that.
Now, for the record, I think Jamaica is like the most beautiful place. And like, I've never seen any issues with any kind of, you know, violence or anything like that. It's just a safe, beautiful place for a tourist to go, have a great time, go to a restaurant. You know, Jamaica is known for friendly hospitality, and everyone who's been, they absolutely love it.
You won't be one won't be bored. I think our culture dominates. Sports and music is what we are known for, but we are in terms of the arts, but and entertainment. But you have a wide variety of different interests. Mountains, sea, beaches. Jamaica is a place.
So
100%.
me and Darlene, we talk about that sometimes. Somehow Jamaica has gotten really dominant in a lot of areas. And Jamaica, it's like, do you think it's the size? Like, what is it about Jamaica that makes it so dominant?
I think it's the culture and also what we are taught at a very young age. We always Jamaicans are taught to be confident. So we come across as sometimes overly confident. But going to school, we always believe that we are the best, and our island, our heroes are what we look up to. Look, we realized early, for example, that we had certain challenges. People weren't necessarily seeing us the way we want to. So we went and we did our own music. We created our own religion. So we realized when things aren't going for us, and we'll have to do it for ourselves. So self-confidence and the need to believe in oneself and not to sit back and be assertive is a hallmark of a typical Jamaican.
I like that you said that. So when you said religion, were you talking about Rastafarianism?
Yes, Rastafarianism, as you know, started in Jamaica. We realized that other persons' gods weren't necessarily sympathetic with our cause, or the Jamaican cause, or the people there and then. So they look out and also look within uh, with persons or deities that they believe were similar and shared the same aspiration. And hence the Rastafarianism religion started with Haile Selassie uh, uh, incarnate, and he's seen by Rastafarianism as somewhat of a deity.
It's you know, it's interesting because I don't think I have done a lot of research on Rastafarianism and its roots. And you know, there's a lot of people with locks, and we didn't invent the locks. I I'm assuming we just tied it into Rastafarianism.
The Rastafari the lock is belief that one shouldn't use any type of race or scissors in the hair. And there are a lot of religions, for example, in Hinduism and Judaism, that Sikhism, for example, that practice, maybe not necessarily lock based on the texture of their hair and the type, but don't believe in cutting one's hair.
So, interesting for me, a lot of people don't understand or don't really talk about grounding and the spiritual connection of having your hair growing out and how that connects you to nature. And I've been doing some research into that, and it's very fascinating. I think the average person, we just wear shoes and we get haircuts, and we don't really talk about that.
Rastafarianism believes that Babylon, which is basically what existing society is not the best place to be or not the necessarily best examples to follow. Though one has to live within or with, but one they tend to separate themselves from things of material things and more look towards nature. So, and you have a lot of people presently who are naturalists who may not necessarily be
Rastafari.
part of the faith, but still practice living a natural life. And it has now shown that to be like that can be a more healthy exercise. It's
Absolutely.
up for discussion, really.
I think of the way we used to live as in humanity in general before the technology, before we came up with advanced things that we start doing with the food. And back when you just picked it, planned it, cut it up and ate it was like the healthier way to live. And slowly, with refrigeration and processing and meat and all of these things, we just kept going down this rabbit hole, which has led us to a lot of health concerns that most of us acknowledge, but we're not doing anything about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, hypertension, for example, affect black here and in the Western Hemisphere disproportionately in terms of other ethnicities. And the one would say that the Rastas, for example, realize that they have stayed away from salt as a part of their practice. It has been shown that they wouldn't likely be hypertensive. So yes, there are some advantages in terms of the diet that they follow, and the fact that it has been shown that by avoiding salt intake in one's diet, it is highly probable that you'd be less likely to be hypertensive.
You know, um, I've just been thinking about a lot of things, and the more I do my research, I realize that the British, they came and they also brought Indians with them, Indians from India.
Mhm.
There's a large population in Jamaica, and that influenced our food a lot.
Well, the food that we eat in former colonies, Jamaica, the West Indies, for example, it's food and taste that has been acquired out of our past experience of being slaves. I mean, for example, people of African ancestry. Lots of the foods, for example, you would know the breadfruit, the fact that we eat a lot of salted food, but a lot of those foods came from different countries. For example, the mangoes, as you know, from India. So the foods that we eat um, is more and maybe become accustomed to it. Basically, a part of our history. They came in. The Brits brought them in because they had a large amount of persons to feed, and the cheaper the food is, and the fact that it could be grown on island means that their overall cost in terms of running the plantation. So the did, you're right, carry a lot of different kind of plants and food stuff into the island, but it was primarily for economic reasons.
Uh, Looking back on your childhood, what are some of the things you remember growing up? What do you remember? What sticks out to you?
Well, I can recall going back to maybe about 3 or 4 grandparents, going to basic school, walking to primary school, which was about 3 miles from where we sea was always a part of life that we grew up and being accustomed to be close to. Um, my school, my primary school that I attended in our campus was just a stone throw away from the sea. We had the wharf where ships used to come, and Jamaica exported bananas. So school life was exciting. Walking home from school was something we would do normally. It was 3 miles. You'd walk or run home from school and do the same thing. Going to school. So, school was great, and we had a lot of friends. And you didn't realize what you didn't have, so you didn't miss anything. You just go ahead with it. We were all together, and we walk as a group going to and from school. Um, High school was a little different because I went to a boarding school. It was uh, being away from home into new environment, interacting with new people. But by that time, I was pretty much um, confident and know exactly what I wanted. So it wasn't really a big challenge in terms of readjustment.
That was a privilege to go to a boarding school. Yes?
Um, yeah, you could call it that. I mean, going to school, high school in Jamaica at that time, not a significant portion of the population were able to go to school. You got there, boarding school or high school for that matter. You got there by being above the average in terms of intellect. There were a number of exams that you would have to pass. But thankfully, by the time I went to high school in the 70s, education was free, as they say then. We were on a democratic socialist government. So um, going to school was not an economic burden in terms of your parents.
So the boarding school was free?
Yes, I went to high school free and tertiary institutions that the state taught.
Wow. Wow.
I my parents would have been able to afford it otherwise. So you had government paid um, tuition and books, or and with a combination of student loan and grants up to university.
So at that time, were you politically aware at that time?
Oh yes, you can't be in Jamaica and not be politically aware. We are always politically and economically aware because of the situation in the country. The average Jamaican will knows a lot about politics and the because it was so much a part of our life in the 70s going into the 80s. Yes, I was political more than average, I would say.
What do you recall from that time?
Um, there was a big transition in the 70s in terms of um, government and the political leanings of the island. Jamaica was relatively capitalist state. Um, Maybe I would say within the 70s. Thereafter, we moved towards what we now call socialism or socialist government, democratic socialist as it would be now classically known as.
And that was,
Um,
there was some connection with Cuba, right?
yes, there was some connection to it. So the as with most systems, I spoke about gaining up to university education at the state cost. These were massive expenses, and some persons are, I would say, may have taken advantage of the situation. And the economy, of course, wasn't able to sustain a lot of these initiatives. And as such, there were big problems leading up to 79, 80, when there was a change in administration. There was a lot of political fallout and violence in Jamaica as political parties pushed against each other for dominance.
I mean, as I look through history, I see, the places where, there were colonial involvement, and you come in, and they interrupt the natural flow of things, you know create systems, walk in, walk out, and the countries, it's very hard to regain stability when they pull out.
Um, in every situation, there are going to be challenges, and there are going to be people for and against, as you see here in this country presently. So it is how one treats with these challenges when they come, and the systems we have in terms of checks and balances that will prevent anarchy and the society tearing itself apart.
So Jamaica, what going into the 80s, it went back into more democratic and things got better.
The economic model, I think, changed. Well, 80 into 83, the model then was more capitalist. And as you may know, a lot of changes took place in the 80s in terms of the communist bloc and the dismantling of, well, breaking up of the Soviet Union. And so that strong polarization that was there before, and the big differences that exist prior to changed because at the time it was felt that there were no major, what would I say, differences in terms of the various political options. So the country moved towards a more capitalist, um, and the state itself removed its hands off a lot of the institutions that were initially state, and you start to have a lot of liberalization, for example, power sector, the telecommunications sector.
Um, me growing up in Jamaica, I felt I didn't experience myself in a large way connected to African American, meaning the things that were happening in America to the African Americans in on the mainland in the United States. I was in somewhat of a bubble, and it wasn't until like after I moved to the States that I started to understand what was going on here. And in a lot of ways, I think you know, what was happening in Jamaica was completely different from African Americans here. Were you paying attention to what was happening to African Americans here?
Yeah. Um, we I grew up in on the northeastern side of the country, and the tourist industry, as I said, was a big thing. A lot of the persons earned their bread and butter or their livelihood working in the tourist sector. And my mom worked a number of years in the tourist industry, and a lot of persons, Jamaica tourism was a big source of income for a lot of people in Jamaica. And persons coming into the island, for example, from North America, they came in with books, and I got a lot of books to read by virtue. Sometimes they took them in and like they're going on a vacation and they would leave them.
Right.
Yeah, so I was pretty much aware of what was taking place. You couldn't do anything about it, but in terms of being able to read and understand some of the challenges. And there were, for example, the farm work program, which now still I think is in place. Persons would go on the farm work program and would come back and see what it was like here in terms of places that you couldn't go and the signs that were there. I may have been an outlier in terms of knowledge, but I think a lot of persons would have had general information in terms of racial issues. Yeah, you may have been young during that time, so you may not have been, it may not have been a conversation piece,
Right.
but there are some persons who were pretty much aware of what was that. I've been one.
But it was it common knowledge? Was it common discourse? Where I mean, obviously, a Jamaican has their own problems, so you know.
We there there was a significant in Jamaica there are still issues in terms of skin tone. Um, Prior to the 70s in terms of one working in some institutions, for example, in hotels and bars,
Right.
and being customer facing.
Right.
Um, and that changed significantly into the 70s, where persons started to look at their identity and being conscious of who they are, and the Black Power movement, which was strong here because of it, took place in the Caribbean. So yes, persons um, start to identify with race, and some of the music that came out in terms of their Black Power movement um, gained some traction within Jamaica. Jamaica was always, I think, conscious of who we are, and I spoke about the religion and Rastafarianism. So people in Jamaica have always realized that race and who you identify yourself with um, makes a difference.
I think, like you referenced a little bit that you were an exceptional student. So I know
I wouldn't say exceptional. I would say I was a bit above average. Um, say, I was above average in terms of I being able to go to a high school and get the college education.
so you going from high school to college. Um, how did that come about? Were you clear about what you wanted to do? Was there some a counselor? Like, how did?
I grew up. My parents and grandparents, should I say grandparents more so. Um, I mentioned about growing up in Ormacabessa.
Hmm.
So bananas, St. Mary bananas, um, coconuts were big items in terms of farm. So I grew up as more or less in a community where farming was the major source of income. So when I went to school, I really did a lot in terms of agriculture. Um, I went to a technical school where you had the options in terms of focusing. It wasn't a grammar school, so you could focus on the technical area in terms of what you want. And in high school, I was more along the agricultural side. I did agriculture science. Actually, I did some work after in agriculture. Um, so that was my first, should I say, love, and I'm still in love with it. I love farming. I love to do things with my hands. I'm just glad. But then I think I had also a gift in terms of the sciences, mathematics, physics, and so forth. And luckily, when you did agricultural science, you did things like accounts, geography, biology, but you also did chemistry, physics, etc. So because I did a number of those science subjects, it was easy for me to shift from agriculture and science to engineering science.
So was that
Um,
your idea? How did you make how did that come about?
in Jamaica, going after high school, they had what was called the youth service, where it was a part of the government regime at the time, where after high school they encouraged you to give back 1 year in terms of voluntary work
Okay.
and with a small stipend, but it was primarily voluntary. I did it for a year. I actually was in a school out of Cabeza where I told you I went to did my primary uh, education. So by that time, a new school, I think in the 70s, I was one of the first. We were one of the first group of persons who went from the primary to the secondary. It was new secondary school, the government had called it at the time. So I went back there after leaving high school to volunteer, do volunteer work. I did like a teacher's aide in agricultural science. It was, good, but then I realized that maybe it wasn't for me in terms of agriculture. And by the time I finished that, and I decided that I'm going to switch to engineering. Actually, after school, I did it put through applications for. I was looking at physiotherapy
Hmm.
and or engineering, and I applied to a number of institutions. Then and CAST, College of Arts, Science and Technology, um, thought I was a good applicant. I had the requisite subjects, and I went into mechanical engineering actually, um, and that's where I started.
So you did agricultural science up through high school. You sent out a bunch of applications, and you one of them happened to be mechanical engineering, and
Mm.
you got accepted into this program, but you didn't
I
have.
got accepted in two institutions, actually three. School of Physiotherapy, I got into a teacher's college at the time, and I got to uh, College of Arts, Science and Technology, which was a technological institution focusing. There were a broad range of subjects,
So what point
or
did
should I say, disciplines.
so what point did you did you find your stride with the engineering?
After the first year in at CAS, I realized I was above average. Apart, in all areas, maybe apart from one, which was technical drawing, which was taking up too many hours of my time doing these drawings. And I switched to electrical engineering because we didn't have to do as much drawing. And it was the best decision I ever made because less of my time on Saturdays. I could spend time doing math problems and other areas that I love. And it went from there.
So by that time, when you were doing CAS at the end of the first year, second year, uh, what was it like going back home and connecting with your peers?
It was good. I had a number of colleagues who were from my community who they were primarily studying teaching or teachers um, or teachers in training. So we'd link up during the summer, and it was really fun. I used to hang out with guys playing music and having a little smoke here and there, and holidays were fun. Um, Go to the beach, river, and all of those stuff.
So
I
some of them got into farming.
Yeah, some got into farming, some got into trouble. um, um, those some who, for example, guys who I went to school with who may not have been able to get into college. But all in all, it was good. You had then you didn't have the semester system, so you could handle a little bit, and when you go back the first um, term, but by that end of the first term, you had to get back in stride that because exams would be coming up shortly within the halls and
So all in all, you finished your college experience, and what was that like? To sum it up.
it was good. I mean, I had no regrets after finishing college. I got a job with the phone company, with a television station. Well, a television station in Jamaica, which was Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation, around Main radio transmitters and TV transmitters. It was very interesting. I mean, poor paying, but a lot of publicity. um, and get a chance to move around the entire island location. It was You didn't have a lot of responsibilities, so the money wasn't a major issue,
Right.
and the people you work and interact with were good people.
So by this time, you were now a professional electrical engineer.
Maybe not. Well, I broke service and went back to school a while. Did some further studies. You know, um, Along with um, on-the-job training. Um, yeah, by that time I was more or less in stride to be on a formal sense. Um, I went to the phone company after leaving the radio station, and that was a totally different experience. I worked on a number of different type of equipment, some that are now obsolete. But yeah, it was quite transformative, and you get a chance to see what real technology is like. And he enhanced my experience in working with them.
So fast forward to what you're doing now. It's a similar telecommunications.
It's listen, I used to work with the phone company. As you know, for example, here the phone company AT&T has broken up because of the monopoly. So it was what was then um, the plain old telephone service. We call it POT. The technology has evolved significantly, as with most technologies in the telecommunication or the science field, as some people know it. So even though it is telecommunications, but the technologies that were used in the 70s and 80s no way compared to what exists today. And the devices that are used was, for example, moving voice and more so data now as the world is more or less moving away from voice towards data. So, and few households now would have maybe a conventional telephone. More persons now use cell phone, and most persons communicate using data facilities as opposed to voice.
So right now we're communicating via data, right?
Correct, correct.
And I think it's safe to say that at some point in the future, regular phones will be obsolete.
Yes, I think the technology is moving so fast that it boggles one mind what it's going to take you in the next 5 to 10 years. Um, the technology is changing, and the young persons are adapting so fast. Um, and what was years ago unique is now normal. The new normals are created almost on a yearly basis, if not more.
Yeah, I think that in the future you'll have one one communication number instead of having an email, a phone number, and an address. You'll just have one, let's say one address, and that address you can call it, you can send an email to it, or you could just send a message.
That's a possibility. Yeah. I mean, I think that today is possibly. I mean, you could, for example, instead of an IP address that is unique here,
Right.
and whatever device you have basically is used. That IP address is used to communicate to you. So you go onto the network and first recognize that you you're there. You go into a shop, your IP address is broadcast, person knows you're there. Not a problem. As a matter of fact, I think that technology is now, quite possible and maybe even beating.
Are we keeping up right now with China and these countries? Are we leading the way? Are we neck and neck?
Um, I think so, but technology, STEM, and the sciences, I think some persons tend to shy away from engineering as a math and physics because to some persons it can be intimidating, and this it has been hard. Um, like with most things, it's practice. So kids or young persons here at times don't want to put the work in. So it's cultural in some societies. For example, persons are willing to work 24/7 or 8. Um, trying to achieve what it is that they want to achieve. So they're more hungry for knowledge, so you put in more effort. So it changes. Um, but you have what it now I call influencers and people who
Mhm.
are creating content. I think there are few of them, but more they're more intense, um, and you have high levels of specialities. So you have persons who specialize in a particular area, very narrowly focused, um, and they are doing big things. But in terms of maybe students coming out with masters or PhDs, I know maybe the more what would I want to say societies where, for want of a better word, more structured, or you don't have as many options. People are pushed along a particular line and they have to stay there and work.
So, in this week's news, we have Jeff Bezos, who just made this trip to outer space. Did you see this?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And the other guy was, is it Branson?
Branson went before, yeah.
What do you think about these outer trips, these outer space trips?
Well, put it this way: to the extent, different persons have different opinions of it. As a person who is in the field, engineering field, and I endorse it. I think it's opening up new opportunities uh, uh, for people who have those aspirations. At first, like with most things, it's going to be pretty expensive, for the early adoption. But as more persons get into it, I think it's going to be a big growth area in terms of revenue. I know there are some concerns in terms of environmental issues and how it will impact the environment in terms of fuel and so forth that they have to use for these trips. But it's entrepreneurship, and this is what this country is all about, right? It's driven by it's a capitalist state, and persons will put their energies and funds into whatever there is that can earn them cash.
Do you see any good in it for the common man?
People have never been capitalism is never something that is meant for the common man. That's the reason why you have the the percentage of super rich compared to the percentage of poor people is so large. Um, and that's what differentiates a capitalist from a socialist state, right? So um, if we were focusing on the common man, um, a lot of the stuff that we see taking place or took place. So what the common man has to do is, or I being one of those, is to try and link up as a group so you can use your influence in terms of numbers to do things that are in your interest. But people with capital and entrepreneurial skills um, are always going to dominate in a capitalist.
I mean, you just got to the head of the whole issue right there. So, a lot of people are saying, these people are taking this money and they're wasting this money and they're going to outer space and there's so much good they could be doing. And you're pretty much saying, well, this is in capitalism, you have the money, you do whatever you want. And down the road you're saying there's going to be a income stream, so this will be something like now rich people are, this is the new frontier, paying $5 million to go out of space. And
Yeah, that's so. So what the common manner or the average man have to do or has to do is to come together as a group and lobby the system in terms of your vote, um, so you can make changes. You may not necessarily, I don't necessarily believe in the trickle down, but you can influence change and how funds that are generated in terms of tax dollars are spent. So it may not necessarily um, be skewed in your direction in a large way, but you can open up opportunities in terms of colleges and universities and become more knowledgeable in terms of being entrepreneurs. Because I think in terms of working in a standard job and trying to become rich is almost impossible. So getting skills or learning new things that you can become self-employed in, then you turn your own capital and you take it from there in terms of. But there's no way a society as ours will see a breaking of the system as it now exists, because people with wealth are always going to be using their wealth in terms of generating power and more fun. These two guys you spoke about earlier, I'm sure they're not doing it for fun, right? They're looking at the business opportunities and the future earnings that they can make from those initiatives that they are involved with present.
I do think a lot about people coming together and trying to create things that are going to benefit them. And I think everyone kind of understands the idea of that, but when it comes down to the realities and the intricacies, people just can't agree on that. And with all of those complexities, time goes by, and people say, well, I can't bother wait for this guy to work with me. I rather just do my own thing. In the meantime, I can get a job over here and not worry about. And then we end up in this cycle of everyone just trying to focus on their individualism, self-interest. They cast their vote, but in the end it just goes around in the circle.
Mm. Yeah, so it takes time and leadership and different ways. You may have read about this new push, the CRT, critical race theory, that's been
Right.
around now, in terms of getting people to become aware of who they are and what has been taking place in their entire history. It's not, these changes are not going to be taking place overnight. I personally think they're going to be a slow process, but you have to start. And the more persons become of who they are and what is happening around them, then the more likely it is that they will change. There's also people are not go. One has to realize that persons of privilege are not going to give up those privileges just like that, if it is working in terms of their behalf and they are comfortable. So there's going to be some pushing back, and I suspect that's going to take some time, maybe not even in my lifetime, to see full and changes. It's going to be a slow process. but I think those changes will come.
All right, Dad, let's take a brief break.
Okay.